It was the first week of July 2019. The heart of summer when the Redwood National Park seemed to breathe life from every root and leaf. Childhood friends Eli Foster and Marissa Kane had been planning their hiking trip for months. Both in their early 20s, they were adventurous but careful, experienced enough to handle rough terrain. They packed lightweight tents, a compact cooking stove, and enough food for 2 days. According to their families, the plan was simple: hike deep into the less traveled Grove Hollow Trail, camp overnight, and return before sundown the next day. The Redwoods, with their ancient, towering trunks and cathedral-like silence, promised a perfect escape from the noise of the city. On the morning of their departure, Eli texted his sister a photo of their starting point, a narrow dirt trail, framed by trees so tall, the sky was just a thin ribbon of blue above. Marissa, always the more excitable one, posted a quick Instagram story of herself grinning in front of a wooden sign that read, "Trail not maintained beyond this point." It was meant as a joke, a cheeky hint that they were heading into the wilder parts of the park. Neither of them knew that would be their last public communication. That evening, when they didn't respond to messages, no one was immediately concerned. They had no cell signal that far into the woods, and both families assumed they'd check in the next day. But the second day came and went, and by the third morning, worry began to take root. Eli's father drove to the trailhead himself, noting that their car was still parked exactly where they'd left it, the windshield dotted with fallen pine needles. It was as if the vehicle had been sitting there for decades, untouched. The search began quickly, first with local park rangers, then with trained search and rescue volunteers. They found the pair's campsite less than a mile from the unmarked trail intersection. The tent was still pitched, unzipped, and inside were sleeping bags neatly rolled up, as though they had left in the middle of the day. Half-eaten granola bars and a thermos of tea sat beside a small fire pit filled with cold ashes. The scene looked too orderly for a sudden emergency, but too abandoned for a casual day hike. Tracks led away from the site. 2 sets of footprints that seemed to wander deeper into the forest, weaving between massive roots and fallen logs. The prints were fresh at first, then began to fade as they reached a moss-covered clearing where sunlight barely touched the ground. And then, they stopped. No broken branches, no disturbed soil, no sign of an animal attack, just silence, and the strange, heavy feeling that hung in the air as if the forest itself was holding its breath. By the 4th day of their disappearance, the Redwood National Park was alive with activity, not from hikers or tourists, but from search teams combing every inch of the dense forest. The air buzzed with the sound of helicopter blades slicing above the treetops, their spotlights cutting through the canopy in narrow beams. On the ground, volunteers moved in coordinated lines, calling out Eli and Marissa's names over and over. Each call seemed to dissolve into the forest, swallowed whole by the thick walls of bark and foliage. It was as if the trees themselves were absorbing sound, refusing to let it travel far. K9 units were brought in on the second day of the search, their noses picking up a strong scent trail from the abandoned campsite. The dogs moved confidently at first, tails high, pulling their handlers toward the east. But every single time they approached the moss-covered clearing, they stopped abruptly. Some dogs whimpered and backed away, others barked frantically, circling without progressing further. Handlers reported a sudden change in temperature in that spot, a coolness that wasn't consistent with the surrounding air. It was there, in that clearing, that all traces of the two friends ended, as though they had stepped off the earth entirely. Locals started showing up to watch the search unfold, some offering help, others quietly sharing their unease. They spoke in hushed tones about the hollow tree, an ancient redwood deep in the park that was older than any written record. According to them, strange things had always happened near it, compasses spinning wildly, electronics failing, without reason, and an odd feeling that you were being watched, even when alone. When a few older rangers heard the locals speak, their expressions shifted ever so slightly, but they didn't comment by the end of the first week. The search expanded beyond the main trail system. Drones were flown overhead to capture hot images, and specialized teams used thermal cameras to detect body heat in dense undergrowth. Every time a hotspot appeared on the screen, a rescue unit would rush in, only to find nothing. No animals, no people, not even a patch of warm earth. To explain the reading, the forest seemed to be playing tricks, giving them just enough clues to keep searching, but never revealing the truth. The FBI arrived on day 10, their black SUVs lined up at the park's main entrance. They treated the disappearance as a potential criminal case, setting up a command post complete with maps, case files, and evidence boards. But the deeper they looked, the stranger things became. No signs of foul play, no ransom demands, no financial motive. Just two young people who had walked into the Redwoods and never come out. Behind the official briefings and stoic press conferences, whispers circulated among the search teams that maybe whatever had happened wasn't something the FBI could explain with evidence or logic. The Redwood National Park had always carried an air of mystery, but the Grove Hollow region where Eli and Marissa vanished was different. Locals described it as the quietest place on earth, a silence so deep it made you aware of your own heartbeat. Even seasoned hikers avoided it, claiming the paths twisted in ways that made no sense, doubling back on themselves without warning. Some swore they had walked for hours only to find themselves back where they started, without realizing they had turned around. The park rangers dismissed these accounts as poor navigation skills, but among the community, Grove Hollow was known as a place you entered carefully and never after dusk. Folklore ran deep in the area. Generations of loggers told campfire tales of something called the spore, a strange, pale fungus that appeared only after a human life was lost in the forest. It was said to glow faintly under moonlight, clinging to bark like a parasite. The old men would speak of finding it wrapped around tree trunks after hearing screams echo through the woods at night, only for those screams to fade into silence with no sign of the person who made them. Most outsiders chalked these up to ghost stories, meant to scare children, but locals treated them with quiet seriousness. There was also the legend of the hollow tree, a massive redwood believed to be over 2,000 years old. It had a hollowed center, large enough for a person to stand inside. Its interior, dark and damp even on the brightest days. Some claimed you could hear voices when you leaned against its bark, not whispers exactly, but a low resonant hum, like a choir buried deep underground. Hunters reported finding animal carcasses at its base, covered in a fine layer of white spores. Over the decades, hikers who wandered too close to the tree seemed to share a common fate. They vanished without a trace. For the scientific community, there was no official acknowledgement of these stories. Mycologists and ecologists who studied the park claimed the fungi were normal, the compass malfunctions explained by magnetic anomalies, and the disappearances just tragic coincidences. Yet, strangely, none of those scientists were willing to set up research stations in Grove Hollow itself. Their studies always seemed to focus on areas a safe distance away. When pressed, they gave vague answers about dangerous terrain or unreliable data collection conditions. But the hesitation in their voices told a different story. In the years leading up to Eli and Marissa's disappearance, there had been at least 3 other cases of people going missing in or near Grove Hollow. A solo backpacker in 2005, a wildlife photographer in 2011, a pair of amateur botanists in 2016. Each time, search efforts were mounted, and each time, they ended in frustration. The official records called them unresolved missing person cases. But the locals had another word for them. Taken. It was early spring in 2023 when Tom Briggs and Isla Perez set out on what was supposed to be a casual, 3-day backpacking trip through the quieter, less traveled routes of the Redwood National Park. Both were experienced hikers with a taste for solitude, and they chose the Grove Hollow region precisely because they had heard it was rarely visited. They weren't the type to be spooked by local legends. In fact, they joked about finding the hollow tree just to snap a selfie and prove nothing supernatural lurked in those woods. The weather was mild, the sky a washed-out blue, and for most of the day, the trip was uneventful until the forest began to change. By late afternoon, on their second day, the trail beneath their boots narrowed and twisted, forcing them to step over gnarled roots and duck beneath low-hanging branches. The air grew heavy, almost humid, and the light filtering through the canopy took on a strange, greenish tint. Tom noticed the birds had stopped singing. Isla, walking a few paces ahead, commented on the stillness, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might disturb something. Then, through a tangle of ferns and fallen branches, they saw it, a massive redwood unlike any other they had passed. The trunk was impossibly wide, its bark dark and weathered, but what caught their attention wasn't its size. The entire base, stretching upward like veins, was covered in a pale, almost translucent fungus. It wasn't the kind of mushroom growth. Either of them recognized it had a strange, pulsing quality, as though it was breathing. Long, thread-like tendrils ran up the bark, weaving in and out of cracks in the wood, swaying slightly despite the utter absence of wind. The smell hit them next, a thick, sweet, almost rotting scent that clung to the back of their throats. They stood there for a long moment, unsure whether to approach. Eli broke the silence first, saying it looked wrong in a way she couldn't explain. Tom pulled out his phone to take pictures, stepping a little closer. Up close, he could see that the fungus seemed to shimmer faintly, reflecting light even in the shade, and buried within the tangled web of its threads were shapes, odd lumps and ridges in the bark that didn't look natural. He leaned in, squinting, until the realization struck him. Some of those shapes looked disturbingly like facial features. As Tom snapped his photos, Isla circled around the tree and stopped abruptly on the far side. The hollow opening yawned before her, wide enough for a person to step inside, its darkness absolute. The inside walls were coated in the same pale fungus, the tendrils forming a dense, web-like lattice. She thought she saw movement within the strands, tiny, twitching pulses that rippled outward like something alive. A shiver ran through her, and she stepped back instinctively. Neither of them spoke about it right then, but both felt the same thing deep in their bones. They had just found something they weren't supposed to see. When Tom and Isla returned to their camp that night, neither of them spoke much about the tree. The silence between them wasn't from lack of words, it was from a shared, unspoken understanding that what they'd seen wasn't normal. Still, Tom couldn't resist uploading one of the clearer shots of the fungus-covered trunk to his Instagram account. The caption was simple: "Weirdest thing I've ever seen in the Redwoods, anyone know what this is?" He didn't expect much from it. Maybe a few curious comments from friends. Instead, by the time they woke up the next morning, the post had already exploded with shares and tags. Within hours, it had jumped platforms. Reddit threads with titles like "WTF? Is this in California's Redwoods?" began dissecting every pixel of Tom's photo. Some users compared it to rare fungal infections in trees, while others claimed it looked like an alien organism. A few eagle-eyed commenters noticed the faint suggestion of human-like features in the growth, an eye shape here, the curve of a mouth there, and the conversation quickly turned from scientific speculation to something much darker. "That's not just fungus," one comment read. "It's growing over something, or someone." Among the flood of responses were a handful from people who claimed they recognized the location. "That's the hollow tree," wrote a local resident whose profile picture showed them in full hiking gear. "2 kids went missing there a few years back. No one goes near it anymore." Others chimed in with unsettling details, stories of hikers hearing whispers near the tree, seeing lights at night that seemed to come from inside its hollow. The more these stories spread, the more the image began to take on a life of its own, crossing from nature curiosity into internet horror lore. By the second day, Tom was getting direct messages from amateur mycologists, investigative journalists, and even a documentary filmmaker asking for the exact GPS coordinates. One message stood out from the rest, a private DM from someone claiming to have been part of the original search for Eli and Marissa. They warned Tom not to go back to the tree. "We searched there," the message read. "It's not just fungus. If you go too close, it notices you." Tom showed it to Isla, but she only shook her head, saying they shouldn't respond. Despite the warnings, the photo kept spreading, eventually catching the attention of local news outlets. Reporters started reaching out to Tom for interviews, and while he refused to give them, the media frenzy only added fuel to the fire. Online sleuths began overlaying Tom's photo with old satellite images of the forest, trying to match tree patterns and shadows. Some claimed the fungus had spread, since the last known images, creeping further up the trunk in just the span of a year. Others swore they could see, in the darkest parts of the hollow, the faint outline of a human hand. When the authorities finally made their way to the exact location in Tom's photograph, they did so quietly, without public announcements or news. Cameras. 2 park rangers, a forensic team, and an FBI field agent hiked into Grove Hollow at dawn, following the coordinates that Tom had reluctantly handed over after repeated requests. They didn't take the main trail. Instead, they moved through dense undergrowth, as if trying to avoid being seen. By mid-morning, they reached the clearing, and there it was, the hollow tree, exactly as in the photo. The pale fungus seeming almost brighter in person. The sight was unsettling enough that even the rangers, who had patrolled these woods for years, stood frozen for a moment before stepping closer. The forensic team began their work immediately, collecting samples of the fungus. When one of them, cut into a thick cluster of tendrils, a faint, sticky liquid seeped out, tinged pink, almost like diluted blood. It gave off a metallic Thames that made the air feel heavier. As they worked, One technician's gloved hand brushed against something embedded beneath the growth, a thin, fibrous strand that wasn't part of the fungus at all. When they gently extracted it, the clearing fell into silence. It was human hair, long, dark, and unmistakably real. DNA testing back at the lab confirmed what the authorities feared. The strand matched Marissa Kane. That alone was shocking. But further investigation at the site uncovered something even more disturbing. Near the hollow's opening, a fragment of faded, torn fabric was found tangled in the threads. A piece of outdoor jacket material, still bearing the logo of the brand Eli had been wearing the day he disappeared. There were no bones, no complete remains, just these chilling traces woven seamlessly into the fungal structure. As if the organism had claimed them for itself. The forensic experts were baffled. Fungi could break down organic matter. Yes, but incorporating human hair and synthetic fabric into their own living structure was unheard of. Some of the threads, when examined under a portable microscope, appeared to have fused with these foreign materials at a cellular level. It wasn't just growing on them, it was growing through them, as though the tree and its fungus were one entity, consuming and preserving in the same breath. The idea that this could have happened naturally seemed impossible, yet here it was in front of them. Rumors began to leak before any official report was made. A ranger who had been at the scene confided in a friend, who passed the story along to a local blogger. The details spread quickly. Human DNA in the fungus, clothing from the missing hikers, and a hollow that seemed deeper and darker than any normal tree cavity. But there was one detail that didn't make it into most retellings, something only the people at the site knew. While collecting samples, one of the forensic techs swore they felt something shift inside the hollow. A slow, almost deliberate movement, as if something was turning toward them in the dark. Within days of the forensic visit, the Grove Hollow section of the park was abruptly closed to the public. Official statements claimed it was due to ecological preservation and hazardous fungal spread, but locals knew better. A chain-link fence went up along the nearest accessible trailhead, adorned with bright red warning signs and government seals. Rangers patrolled the area more frequently, their usual casual demeanor replaced by a tense alertness. They refused to answer questions about what was found at the tree, simply repeating the same line. This area is off limits for your safety. Despite the barricades, rumors spread like wildfire. Some hikers swore they had still managed to reach the perimeter by cutting through unmarked trails. They claimed to have seen the fungus from a distance, and more disturbingly, that it was no longer confined to just one tree. Glimpses of pale, pulsing growth were spotted on neighboring trunks, small tendrils weaving like searching fingers toward the forest floor. At night, the growth seemed to glow faintly, casting ghostly outlines in the moonlight that looked disturbingly like human silhouettes. The families of Eli and Marissa were approached repeatedly by journalists, paranormal investigators, and even documentary crews. But they declined every interview. When pressed, Marissa's mother issued a single, cryptic statement: "The forest took them. Don't go looking. It might take you too." Her voice cracked as she said it, and she refused to elaborate. The few people who had spoken to her privately claimed she had been shown photographs by the FBI, images she described as things you can't unsee. Whispers began to circulate that not everyone who ignored the warnings came back. In online hiking forums, a few threads appeared detailing recent disappearances in the park. Solo explorers, amateur ghost hunters, and curiosity seekers drawn by Tom's viral photos. Their friends posted frantic pleas for information, but the threads often went quiet within days. Some accounts were even deleted altogether, as if the people behind them had simply vanished from the internet too. Tom and Isla, the ones who had started the viral storm, quietly deleted all their social media profiles a month later. Friends said they moved out of state without telling many people where they were going. Before disappearing from public life, Tom sent one final private message to the same person who had warned him months earlier: "You were right. It knows when you're near, and it remembers faces." Some mysteries fade with time, becoming nothing more than fading headlines and whispered folklore. But in the Grove Hollow section of the Redwoods, the story hasn't faded. It's still alive, growing, and spreading. The hollow tree still stands somewhere beyond that fence, hidden in the shadows, its pale threads reaching just a little farther with each passing season. Whether you believe it's a rare ecological phenomenon or something far older and hungrier than science can explain, one thing is certain: the forest is not empty. And if you ever find yourself walking among the redwoods and notice the air go still, the birds fall silent, and a sweet, rotting scent on the wind, don't look for the tree dot, because if you find it, it might already be looking for you.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.